Welcome back to the Leora Super Fun Learning Hour.
Great to be back.
We're so glad you could join us. This is, believe it or not, the 5th deep dive in our seminar series looking at the Oedipal triangle. You know, that really core psychoanalytic idea about kids and parents.
Fundamental stuff.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground already, laid some foundations. And now we're getting into something really fascinating. Heinz Kohut's key paper, The Oedipus Complex and the Self-Psychology.
A really pivotal piece of work.
It really is. And our mission today basically is to unpack how Kohout just radically rethought this whole Oedipal concept.
Yeah, he shifts things quite dramatically.
He does. He moves the focus away from that intense instinct-driven conflict with parents and puts it squarely onto disruptions in the cohesion of the self. Subtle, maybe, but so impactful.
It's a game changer, really, because, the classical view emphasizes those forbidden urges, the instinctual prohibitions.
Yeah.
But Kohout, he points us towards something else entirely, the crucial role of empathic failures.
Empathic failures.
Exactly. Failures in how parents respond or don't respond empathetically. He argues that's what shapes the inner world, especially around this Oedipal phase. It's a profound shift.
He really is. And to fully get what Kohout did, maybe we should quickly just touch on that classical Freudian view again, just briefly.
Good idea. Set the stage.
So, for Freud, right, the Oedipus complex is universal. Every kid goes through it. It's driven by these really powerful sexual and aggressive urges towards the parents.
Wanting one parent, seeing the other as a rival.
Exactly, which leads to massive inner conflict. Castration anxiety for boys, penis envy for girls, all quite traumatic stuff.
Definitely. High drama.
And the resolution, in Freud's model, comes through repression, pushing it all down. And that process helps form the superego, our conscience. So the whole phase is like this intense battleground of drives.
And look, that classical view, hugely important historically. It shaped so much of psychoanalysis. Kohout isn't just throwing it out the window.
No, not at all.
But he makes this really critical argument. He says that pathological Oedipus complex, the one Freud described, full of the guilt, the anxiety, the conflict, he insists that's not the main universal experience.
Okay. So what is it then?
He argues it's actually a secondary thing, a consequence, an outcome of something else going wrong earlier, not the starting point.
Right. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Because if the messy, conflict-ridden Oedipus isn't the default, Kohout introduces this idea of a healthy or normal Oedipus complex, which sounds totally contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Based on Freud.
Yeah.
So what does a healthy Oedipus even look like in Kohout's world?
It does sound like a contradiction at first, but to get it, you have to understand Kohout's central concept, the self, with the capital S.
The self.
For Kohout, the self is like the core of who you are, the
Yeah.
center of your psychological universe, your sense of identity, vitality, cohesion. And the self, it has fundamental needs, often called narcissistic needs, but maybe think of them as core psychological needs.
Like what? What kind of needs?
Well, the sources really focus on two big ones. First, mirroring. That's the need to feel seen, understood, admired, validated by others, like looking in a mirror and seeing affirmation reflected back.
Okay, makes sense. Feeling recognized.
Exactly. And second, idealization. That's the need to look up to someone strong, calm, admirable, whose qualities you can sort of internalize, feel connected to their strength.
Right. Having heroes or role models.
Basically, yes. And Kohout says this, self, our core identity, it doesn't just pop into existence, it develops and gets stronger, more cohesive over time through ongoing empathic responses from what he calls self-objects.
Self-objects.
Yeah, think of them as the key people early on, usually parents who meet these mirroring and idealizing needs. They function like part of the child's self temporarily, providing that validation or that idealized strength until the child gradually takes those functions inside themselves, builds their own self-esteem, their own capacity for calm.
Wow, so the child isn't just this bundle of drives clashing with the world,
Yeah.
but a developing self that needs this specific nurturing empathic environment to actually come together properly.
Precisely. It's a huge shift in perspective.
So then, how does that view change how we understand the Oedipal phase itself, if it's all about the self and its needs?
Well, it changes everything. It reframes the whole Oedipal period. If you look at it through this self-psychology lens, you get Kohout's healthy Oedipus.
Okay, let's hear about the healthy version.
This is what happens, Kohout says. When a child enters that phase around age 3 to 6 with an already pretty solid, cohesive, well-supported self, because they've had reasonably good empathic experiences earlier on.
Yeah, they're starting from a place of strength.
Exactly. And in that context, those emerging sexual feelings, those aggressive or rivalrous feelings towards parents, they aren't seen as fundamentally toxic or dangerous.
What are they seen as?
Kohout calls them segmental, meaning they're just one part of the child's overall experience, not the whole story. And often, he says, they're joyful expressions of a growing, vigorous self.
Joyful. That's not a word Freud would use here.
Not typically, no. Kohout sees them as part of a healthy push for self-affirmation, for ambition, for trying things out. Like any other part of a child exploring who they are and what they can do. Not inherently pathological.
And the parent's role in this healthy picture must be crucial then.
Absolutely central. The sources stress this. In the healthy Oedipus, the parents respond with empathy, non-judgmentally. They see these intense new feelings. The affection, the rivalry, not as threats, but as normal signs of their child growing up.
So no shaming, no harsh prohibitions.
Ideally, no. They allow the child to feel these things without making them feel bad or wrong. The feelings get acknowledged, maybe gently guided, but they don't overwhelm or traumatize the child. They get integrated into that strengthening self.
It sounds much less like a crisis and more like a developmental step, almost like learning to walk, but emotionally.
That's a good way to put it. It's a challenging step, sure, but a strengthening one if handled well. So in this healthy scenario, the whole Oedipal situation actually reinforces the self. It boosts the child's ambitions, their ideals, their sense of vitality. It becomes this non-traumatic, even exciting stage for consolidating who they are. The Oedipal victory for Kohout isn't about conquering forbidden desires through repression.
What is it then?
It's about achieving greater self-cohesion. The child comes out feeling more solid, more themselves, having navigated these complex feelings with parental support.
Okay, that paints a really different picture. So if that's the healthy path, then we get to the core of Kohout's reinterpretation, the pathological Oedipus, the Freudian version.
Exactly.
Kohout says this isn't the primary experience, but a result, a secondary thing. So what causes it, according to him?
Empathic failure. That's the root cause in Kohout's view. It arises when parents have significantly failed to provide that necessary empathy earlier in the child's development, failures in meeting those core needs for mirroring and idealization.
What kinds of failures are we talking about?
It could be many things. Consistent lack of attunement, just not getting the child's needs, or maybe being overly intrusive or stimulating, overwhelming the child, or outright rejection, hostility, maybe even seductive behavior, anything that doesn't provide that calm, validating, supportive presence.
And the consequence of those failures.
The consequence is a weak, fragile, or fragmented self. The child hasn't built up that internal cohesion, that resilience.
Okay.
So then, when the normal developmental urges of the Oedipal phase arrive, those segmental, sexual, and aggressive feelings, the fragile self just can't handle them. They become overwhelming, terrifying, anxiety-producing.
So it's not the drives themselves that are inherently toxic.
No.
It's the weakness of the self that makes them feel toxic. The self can't integrate them.
You've got it precisely. The self is too vulnerable, too fragmented, and that vulnerability, that lack of structure, transforms what should be normal developmental feelings into something much more intense and frightening.
How does it transform them?
They regress, essentially. They become experienced as these intense, overwhelming, archaic drives, more like the raw, unregulated drives of a much earlier pre-Oedipal stage, because the self lacks the structure to contain and modulate them properly.
And that leads to the classic picture.
That leads directly to the classical picture. Intense conflict, crippling guilt, massive anxiety, and the heavy use of defenses like repression just to cope. So the neurotic Oedipus, for Kohout, is a secondary pathology.
A secondary to what?
Secondary to the primary pathology, which is the damaged, underdeveloped self. The Oedipal phase then becomes, tragically, another arena where the self fragments further rather than consolidating.
That is such a profound shift. It changes how you think about psychological problems entirely.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for, say, therapy? How we help people?
The implications for therapy are huge, really starkly different from the classical approach.
How so?
Well, think about classical psychoanalysis. The main goal is often seen as resolving those underlying instinctual conflicts, right? Working through the repressed Oedipal issues, bringing the unconscious drives into awareness so they can be managed.
Makes sense within that framework.
But with Kohout's self-psychology, the focus shifts dramatically. Therapy isn't primarily about resolving drive conflicts. It's about strengthening the self.
Repairing the damage.
Exactly.
Yep.
Repairing those narcissistic vulnerabilities caused by the early empathic failures. The therapist often needs to function temporarily as a kind of empathic self-object for the patient.
Providing the mirroring or idealization that was missing.
Precisely, allowing the patient to have that corrective emotional experience within the therapy relationship. And the long-term goal is for the patient to internalize these functions to build their own stable sense of self-worth, their own capacity to soothe themselves, their own healthy ambitions.
So symptoms that look aidable, like intense guilt about success or relationship conflicts repeating parental patterns, these might actually be signals of that deeper fragility in the self.
That's often how Kohout saw it. They're signals of a self struggling for cohesion, not just echoes of an old drive conflict.
It really does change the whole therapeutic task. You're not just taming desires, you're trying to rebuild or shore up the fundamental structure of the person's psychological world.
That's a perfect way to summarize it. It's about building capacity, resilience, cohesion within the self.
Okay, so we've taken quite the deep dive today into Heinz Kohout and his really transformative take on the Oedipus complex, looking at his paper, The Oedipus Complex and the Self-Psychology.
We sure have.
He really asks us to see this phase not just as this universal battle of drives Freud described, but as this critical point where the self either grows stronger through empathy or it fragments because that empathy is missing.
That shift from instincts and prohibitions to empathy and failures, from parent conflict to self-cohesion, it just offers such a different, and I think for many, a very resonant way to understand development, why things go wrong, and how we might heal. It highlights the incredible power of that early emotional world.
It really does. And as you sit with all this, maybe consider this thought. If Kohout is right, if the neurotic Oedipus complex is largely a symptom of a self damaged by a lack of empathy, what would happen if we as individuals, as parents, as a society, placed a much greater, more conscious emphasis on providing consistent empathy, on actively fostering self-cohesion in early childhood? How might that change things? How might that impact mental well-being down the line? What kind of world could we build if the foundation was a stronger, more integrated, more empathically nurtured self from the start?
That's a powerful question to ponder.
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this exploration on the Deep Dive. We hope these insights add value to your own Leora Super Fun Learning Hour.
Thanks for listening.